She always leaves a horrible mess of destruction and pain in her wake. Parents of sociopaths, psychopaths or people who have done terrible things, how do you feel about your offspring? Warning, this content may be upsetting or disturbing to some audiences. I had my son when I was 21 years old. He was unplanned. His mother and I had been together for a little over a year when she got pregnant. I was working at a pizza place when he was born. I remember the first time I saw him, he had big blue eyes and looked a lot like his mother. I loved him from the first time I saw him. I told myself I was going to do whatever it takes to bring him happiness. The first 3 months were wonderful. I was learning how to be a father and spent a lot of time with him. Times got rough. Money was a problem and my relationship with his mother was a disaster. We fought a lot, screamed. I regret those screams. She developed a painkillers addiction after an operation and there was a constant malaise when we were together. She wasn't the same. I tried to help her but she wouldn't let me. More fighting ensued. A week after his first birthday I found out that his mother had been cheating on me. There was no reconciliation possible. It was broken. I moved out, tried to get custody but lost in court. Only saw him every 2 weeks. He was a normal child, liked Pokemon a lot. We would watch it together when he was at my place. Gave him gifts, cuddled him, told him I loved him and was proud of him while he was growing up and then things changed. At around 8 years old he became distant, rarely talked, was prone to fits and spent most of his time in his room. I tried to get him to talk to me but it was of no use. I saw a huge bruise on his left shoulder one day. I asked him where he got it. He shrugged it off. Then it was a broken finger, and then a rib. I contacted the police. His mother said he was clumsy and always fell but my son finally admitted that she beat him but the cops did nothing. I finally got his custody when he was 12. His mother took too much pain meds and had set fire to her apartment. She was declared unfit. He was never the same. The joyful child he was gone. I tried to get him help but he'd run off. I tried to get him to meet a counselor but he ditched the meeting. As he was going through adolescence I was seeing less and less of him. He started to hang out with questionable kids and got into pretty hard drugs. I did what I could to get him out of this slippery slope but to no use. He hated me. The more I told him I loved him, the more he despised me. I found heroin needles on his room's floor. When I questioned him about it he pulled a knife at me, called me a piece of dog crap and ran away. He was 18. He never came back home. On October 8, 2009 I got a phone call I'll never forget. It was my son, calling from jail. "Help me Dad, they're saying I raped someone." My son had apparently picked a 14-year-old from the mall, told her he was some kind of talent scout, brought her to his friend's apartment, knocked her out, beat her and raped her mercilessly. He denied, claimed his innocence but evidence was overwhelming. I visited him in prison until one day I asked him why he did it. He looked at me with the coldest face and said I had too much free time on my hands and not enough vagina under my fists. I cried. He laughed. I have not seen him since. Keep in mind, first of all, that sociopath and psychopath aren't clinical diagnoses. I'm answering this using the commonly accepted laypeople's idea of this term. I adopted a 7-year-old boy about 14 years ago. It was the worst decision of my entire life. He was, and is, a sociopath. He lies. He steals. He hurts. He cheats. He can be incredibly superficially charming, but leaves a truly awe-inspiring wake of emotional and physical destruction behind him everywhere he goes. I say awe-inspiring because unless you've spent time around this, unless you truly understand how amazingly destructive this can be to a person's very self, you just don't get it. The psychiatrist during pre-adoption gave some warnings in her brief. The social worker, whose job it is to get kids adopted, pushed and pushed, poo-pooing the psychiatrist's reports, minimizing them and insisting reports from his placements were biased. Now, understand, I am not inexperienced. I have other kids. I've worked with special needs kids. I thought I was prepared. I wasn't. Nothing, and I mean nothing, can prepare someone to have this inflicted on themselves. It changed me. It fundamentally changed me as a person. It did the same to everyone else in the family, in different ways. Friends tell me I am less outgoing, slower to laugh and smile and joke, less prone to trust, and far too matter-of-fact and blasé about everything. I've developed the latter as a survival defense mechanism. One learns quickly, one simply cannot react emotionally to anything. At all. Ever. As it will be used brutally against you. Even when as a teen he steals your car, ignores you when confronting him in the driveway as he attempts to make his getaway, then runs over you in the process, hurting you fairly badly. and then driving away while you lie there screaming, and then coming back hours later, and acting as if literally nothing has happened. Even conning the authorities into thinking it was a silly accident despite testimony and another witness account. He has stolen more things than I can imagine from home. Game consoles, electronics, computers. He is indiscriminate. Now an adult, he steals from children, just to pawn the stuff to pay off his dealer so he doesn't get beat. He's never held down a job for more than a week or two, and that only 3 or 4 times in his life. He survives by manipulating and stealing. But, he knows it all and will tell everyone, and me, in detail, how they are doing everything wrong and how easy it is to be wealthy. He doesn't appear to see the irony at all. He lies like most people breathe. Literally, every word that comes out of his mouth is manipulative and untrue in some way. One learns to expect it. Nothing, at all, ever, is at face value. It is horrible. He is horrible. I hate him. But I love him. I spent so much time and effort trying to help. He returned the effort by hurting, manipulating, lying, stealing. I cannot help wishing he would get in a traffic accident, get stabbed, shot, beat up into a coma, disabled. I cannot help feeling like a horrible, disgusting human being, despite everything he's done, for even allowing myself to think this. But I still think it. Again and again. He is no longer living here, but every time nobody is home, we return wondering what will be missing or wrecked. He doesn't get caught, legally. He's just barely smart enough and charming enough to set up others instead, and somehow manage to keep himself out of trouble. Mostly. He's been tuned up by former friends, investigated, etc. But so far has managed to avoid serious repercussions. I have little doubt it will catch up with him eventually. Hopefully somebody won't be badly hurt or die before this happens. It's a constant nightmare. Slowly getting better as our lives move apart, and with the incredible help of friends and family to set and brutally enforce limits. He's a dangerous person though. I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that one day I may wake up to a gunshot or a knife wound. Moral of the story. If there's any hint at all, of a kid having no ability for empathy, lack of remorse, no moral development, and incredibly superficially charming, then run. Run fast. Run hard. Run away and never, ever look back. Just get away. I think my mom is a sociopath. I was raised by my grandparents for the first 13 years of my life, but she was in and out for most of that time. When I was 5, her boyfriend tried to choke me to death. She was mad at the time, but afterwards, she didn't report it and we continued to stay with him. My grandpa used to hit me, and was constantly mean to me, made me sit on the floor, wouldn't let me talk around him, threw me outside by my hair, told me I was stupid, worthless, etc. That sucked, but when I went to live with my mother, who'd supposedly cleaned up her act, it got worse. Physical pain and terror are bad, and everything, but my mom tried to unmake me. Her crap messed with my mind, almost drove me insane. By the time I moved out, I was planning to murder her and then myself. And that would not have been the first, even the second time someone tried to kill her. She would act like she was the only person who ever loved me, not an unrealistic concept, considering how everybody else in our life treated me, then be needlessly cruel and nasty. She's a practicing anorexic, so we would crash diet together, and she always told me I would be so pretty if I just lost a few more pounds. When I tried to get recovery for my own anorexia, she was actively negative. She complained about what I was doing to myself when I started to gain weight. Whenever I would try and stand up to her, she would cry and complain that I was taking advantage of her, being a terrible daughter, breaking her heart, etc. Instead of beating on me like my grandpa did, she would torture me. Literally stuff that is against the Geneva Convention. She would keep me awake at night, she would tell me detailed plans for suicide. In the morning she would wake me up by dragging me out of my bed by my feet, screaming the whole time about something I couldn't have possibly done to her. She would alternate concern and violence or threats of violence completely at random. You never knew what she would act like, minute to minute. She's told me before that she treated me so horribly because of my bad karma. If I ever tried to point out how toxic this all was, she would tell me I brought it on myself by being negative. The thing that really makes her a sociopath is that this is not insane behavior. This is just the stuff she did to keep me distracted and confused so that she could get the $300 a month state aid for having me in her house. If I'd ever been aware enough to leave, that money would have gone with me. Which it eventually did when I did leave. She does it to my grandma. She tells her one thing, then another, then confuses them with each other. Then my uncle thinks my grandma is getting dementia, and my mom totally agrees, because she needs grandma's car, or she needs everybody to be too upset that grandma is confused to wonder why grandma is paying part of her rent. Her ex-boyfriend pays her car payment. For a while, she bragged that he still thought they were together, joking that he's too old and ugly. I know she mocks him because he can't get it up. He can't get it up because he has prostate cancer. He's a really nice man, and she will do anything to ensure that she's in his will, and that she gets as much out of him as she can before he dies. To this day she pretends she doesn't understand why she can't have my address. She actually asked me what she'd done to me lately to deserve such horrible treatment. Lately? The only reason she hasn't hurt me lately is because she doesn't know where I am, and only has the most basic details of my life. I'm not a parent, but I have an older sister who I believe would be considered a sociopath. She has torn apart my family, physically hurt us, stolen from us, lied to us, among other terrible things. My mother, the kindest woman in the world, has been completely physically and emotionally ravaged by my sister, Brandy. Brandy was born 8 years ahead of me, in 1981. My mother was married to an abusive alcoholic at the time, Brandy's father, Vic. He disappeared shortly after she was born and never heard from again. However, Mom says she sees a lot of Vic in my sister, that he had a very similar personality. When Brandy was 5, my mom met my dad. She was extremely unhappy with the new addition to the family and would often have random fits of rage and throw things at my dad and become physically violent. My dad just thought she needed to adjust to having a male role model in her life, and she would eventually settle down. That never happened. Shortly after Brandy's 8th birthday, I was born. This caused even more disruption. When I was around 6 months old, she began covering my mouth with her hands, when I wasn't crying. When I was happy. Because happy babies disgusted her. She also began stealing my toys, blankets, and binkies, throwing them in the trash. My parents started to grow really concerned, and started sending her to counseling. They could not figure out why she acted like this. They are kind, loving, caring parents, doing their best. Around this time, they find out they are pregnant again, with my little sister, who was born about a year and a half after I was. When my little sister turns 1, Brandy throws her into a wall and breaks her arm. My parents are extremely scared, frustrated, and unprepared. They decide it might be best for her to live with my grandma, 2 hours away. From 10 to 13, Brandy is molested by my step-grandpa, until his death, we found out years later, and my mom has never forgiven herself. This is when her life really starts to spin out of control. She begins stealing, lying, cheating, sleeping around, etc. She develops an alcohol and drug problem by age 15. She is expelled at age 16. At age 18, she throws my grandma to the ground and steals her car. She ends up with a man who is in his 40s. Chris becomes my brother-in-law. He is an alcoholic, a felon, has a gambling problem, a drug addict, a woman beater, thief, just an all-around bad person. But he is terrified of Brandy. He once told me she is evil, an evil he never wants to experience again. He is currently in hiding with their son, who is also terrified of my sister. She ends up pregnant at 22. She doesn't care. She drinks, smokes, does drugs. My nephew is born blind and develops autism. She would contact us when she needed something, but we could never find her. She would find us, and it always ended up hurting. She runs away from everyone with her son and abandons him at age 4 in a crib in an apartment in Alaska. He is found 3 days later, extremely malnourished, laying in his own poop. It was horrible. She's 32 now. I have no idea where she is at the moment. My parents have a restraining order against her, and moved. Here's a list of horrible things she has done to us. Stolen my vehicle and my mom's, broke into my parents' home and smashed every single dish and pulled everything from the cabinets and pantry into a giant pile in the middle of the kitchen. Tried to stab my dad. Tried to stab me. Abandoned my little sister and me at a mall 6 hours from home when we were 11 and 12. Covered my little sister's mirror in her blood, after she slit her wrists. Tried to steal my identity. Accused my brother-in-law of raping her. Tried to smother my grandmother in the hospital, she blames everything on her, etc. She always leaves a horrible mess of destruction and pain in her wake. She cons people for fun. She uses women and men. I'm sure she's probably killed someone at some point in her life, or will. She is pretty and extremely charming, until she has a complete breakdown. I don't even know how to explain the feeling she gives me. It is on a level of creepy I have never experienced other than with her. Just her smile makes me want to vomit. My brother is schizophrenic, a drug abuser and an alcoholic. His schizophrenia was not diagnosed for a long time, and as a result he wasn't properly treated until very late in his life. Growing up with him was a nightmare. He would physically assault my sisters and I. He would steal money, he would take our bikes and wreck them. He would destroy things that he knew we liked. He would get raging drunk or stoned and launch into violent episodes every holiday, hell all the time, but the holidays really got him going. It once took 6 cops to wrestle him into submission to be hauled off to get medical or mental treatment. The best parts of my childhood, pre-getting my license, were when his butt was in various mental institutions. It meant we finally had peace in the house. The list of hurts, assaults, thefts, attacking any friends we allowed over, goes on and on and on, and it is very hard to fully articulate what it was like growing with him. I could list dozens and dozens of hurts that evil sack of crap did to my sisters and I, and each would not do justice to describing the living hell it was to deal with him. I have read stories about people having abusive parents, and it is the same sort of thing. My parents were divorced and my mom did her best, but what can one do with that, when you have to work all day and all you want to do at the end of the day is crash? The only good part of it all was that he consumed all of my mother's energy, so I was completely unsupervised, and when I got my license, I got myself a car and I was pretty much never home after. In the summer I would split for weeks. As a 16-year-old I drove to the Outer Banks of North Carolina from Charlottesville. It is about a 45-minute drive, with nowhere to stay, and lived out of the car, crashing at friends' places, sleeping on porches of vacation homes for about a week. I did this with very little money and with no one knowing I had done it other a few friends I hung around with. I actually had a ton of fun in high school, and when I got to college I loved life. Mental illness is a serious disability, and living with a disabled person is a nightmare. My brother is in jail. He's adopted, which is only important because it means I can sleep at night knowing that I don't possess the potential that he has. He has ADHS, FA, FAD, OD, ODS, RAD, and is bipolar and very aggressive. He doesn't have a legal note that he's a sociopath, since he was put in prison before he was 18, but if you look up the definition, it describes him perfectly. The first time I realized that gave me chills. I could go into detail about him, but the short of it is, I hate him. He's my brother, and regardless of how he joined the family, that is a fact. But after he molested children and tried to kill my father, I stopped talking to him. That was 5 or 6 years ago, I've lost count. That boy ruined my family and stole my childhood. Instead of happy memories, I have the memories of our town's cops ingrained in my head. Instead of enjoying childhood, I had to know about my mother trying to kill herself and having my father coming and crying to me while I was barely a teenager. The worst part of it all is watching my parents. For everything my brother did to me, he was just who he was, a manipulative sociopath. For my parents, he was their son and they were doing everything they could do for him. Even after he tried to kill my dad is still his biggest advocate and believes he can change. It is heartbreaking to see. I know my parents are split in emotions depending on the day. Some days they believe he's making progress and will see the light. Those are the hardest, as I have to decide whether to remind them he's manipulating them to get what he wants, or if I should let them have false hope. Some days they feel the way I do, that he has driven them to bankruptcy, ruined their futures and made them miss their back-burner daughter's life. I am a step-parent to a boy whom I believe to be a psychopath. I met his father 5.5 years ago, and my stepson, let's call him B, had just turned 2. I had my own son, known as E, who was 3. At the time B had just started throwing fits. We, of course, thought they were from the terrible twos. We thought it would stop. B's mom had always been in his life, but had never had custody. Just visitation, which was never regular, but she saw him at least once a month. She wasn't a horrible mother, and still isn't. But when she lived with anyone, she would foist all childcare responsibilities to that person. She also has bipolarity running in her family. They all pull crazy stunts, but for the most part, are just good enough to pass within societal standards. When B turned 3 he continued his fit throwing, but including urinating on things and himself to get revenge for punishment. We continued to discipline him with timeouts, spankings, or taking toys away, but we still thought it was just a phase. 3 months before he turned 4, B's father and I got married. We also started him in counseling. We kept him in it for a long while, even though it only seemed to make him worse. There was never a day without a fit. We also started him in a preschool for 3-year-olds. I also worked there, but not with him. I was ashamed/embarrassed because he constantly threw stuff, screaming, hitting, kicking fits over things like using the restroom, washing his hands, or putting toys away. We eventually couldn't afford his counseling anymore due to other medical bills. His behavior continued into kindergarten. His teacher believed he had ADD because he refused to pay attention and do his work. He eventually told the school counselor that he just didn't want to do it. This is a continuing problem today. We battle over it constantly, and not just with schoolwork, but the basic kid things, personal hygiene, cleaning his room, chores, helping around the house at all, etc. He is now 7.5. He still throws screaming, raging fits. He also still urinates for revenge. I have to clean his bathroom constantly because when he gets mad, he goes in and pees all over the floor and shower curtain. He also lies in bed every morning and pees himself, then changes his underwear. He does that even when he hasn't been in trouble. He refuses to wash himself in the shower. It's been weeks since he last washed his hair. We've simply given up on that. He refuses to do the majority of his homework. He constantly lies about everything. He makes up grand stories about all kinds of stuff, from things you can't really do in a Minecraft game to saying my mother punched him. He takes anything you say and twists it wildly around in his head, then throws it back at you, starting that you hate him or want him to die or want to kill him. He has ripped up his own clothing, his toys, his bedding, and anything else he can lay his hands on. He also tried to manipulate every situation he can and has been known to steal, particularly from school. No matter what you do or say or try, he will argue with you until he's won or thinks he has. No matter what we do or where we go, even if it's just for him, he's unhappy. Always, always unhappy. He has never been molested or touched by anyone. We know this for certain and have had him evaluated by his new counselor just in case. Our families don't have extended contact with him for all the reasons listed, but my mother generally keeps him one night every 2 weeks. His mother's family are hugely into bikers against child abuse. We know them all personally and no one new has come into his life. Plus, when he's with his mom, who is now a lesbian, he generally doesn't see her family much. The reason I'm telling this is because his latest terrible behavior is sexual. The first time he was alone with his Kindle, 15 minutes while my mother did laundry, he looked up boobs on YouTube and watched a bunch of videos. He got in a lot of trouble, including having no Kindle and no YouTube access, but went to his mom's and did the same thing, but tried to show his little 6-year-old sister. Also within the last year, he has told E that he has touched his sister's boobs and peeped on her while she's naked. Not to mention all the times he has touched E's private parts, including an incident when he put his mouth on E's crotch. E was wearing jeans, and bit down. He also touched our toddler S's behind repeatedly, in a not nice way. He is no longer allowed to be with him alone. He is currently back in counseling. Although there has been no improvement in months and the counselor is running out of ideas. How do I feel about him? Honestly, I can't stand him. I know he's only 7, but he has ripped our family apart. My husband and I are completely different people than we ever were. We are tired and stressed from the daily battle with him. We are sad and drained from our own feelings toward him. And we are guilty. So heavily and deeply guilty. My husband is especially guilty, feeling that he put this awful burden on me, E, and S. This is a child I have loved with my whole heart. I would say that at one time, I even loved him more than my son, E, but the continued conflict and screaming and hate he spews has caused me to retract a lot of that love. I'm a stay-at-home mom. I care for him every single day, all day. I will continue to do so, but when he turns 18, I'm not sure what will happen. My hope is that he gets better, but I honestly no longer believe that will ever happen. Thanks for listening to Radio TTS. Hit the subscribe button and activate the bell notification for more videos like this. And remember, not all people who are diagnosed as psychopaths behave like this. Many have been in therapy and live normal lives. Anyway, share your own psychopath or sociopath stories in the comments.